Harry defeated Voldemort by eliminating his Horcruxes. A Horcrux is an object that's used to store a fraction of one's soul. Voldemort made 7. If anyone held the Horcrux for an extended period of time, their mood would become dark. Whatever tainted their heart would be expressed when they wore this object. Destroying the Horcrux is symbolic for destroying the poison within one's heart and mind. The Horcruxes were found in all different locations, which I feel is symbolic for where corruption is found. The first Horcrux is a locket, which the three find Umbridge wearing in court. We first see the courtroom in the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry was arrested and tried for performing underage magic while he was defending himself against Dementors. To reach the courtroom, Harry boards an elevator and goes down to the bottom level of the Ministry. We've all heard the songs Stairway to Heaven and Prince's Are We Gonna Let the Elevator Bring Us Down? Staircases are linked to heaven because they're symbolic for the spine. The ancients knew of cerebrospinal fluid, which is produced in the cerebrum and flows up and down the spinal column. Because of this oil's ability to heal, regenerate, and enlighten, the ancients named it Christos and Christ oil. To preserve this oil, one must live righteously through eating healthy, meditation, exercise, and so on. It takes sustained effort to make the oil climb the stairs. Conversely, it's much easier to let yourself devolve, to sleep instead of meditate, to eat conveniently instead of healthfully, hence hell's association with the lazy man's elevator. We can even look at the 2010 movie Devil, which depicted a group of people stuck in an elevator with the devil, where they all die one by one. Unlike the lobby area of the Ministry, which is somewhat inviting, the courtroom is steely, dark, and cold. Black tiles lining the walls and floors. Inside the actual courtroom are black benches, black podium, more black walls, and fire. Considering that Capricorn is associated with cold, the color black, the law, and the pit, while hell is linked with downward elevators and flames, we have an idea of what Rowling is trying to convey. Once we enter the courtroom, we see Harry has absolutely nobody on his side, and about 50 Ministry members on the other side. As to be expected, it's not going well for him. Minister Fudge, acting as the presiding judge, begins the questioning, asking Harry if he used magic when he wasn't supposed to. Harry said, yes, but he was cut off. Fudge immediately asked him if he was aware he's not allowed to use magic outside
school while under the age of 17?
Yes, I was.
Witches and wizards of the Wizengamot.
I was only doing it because of the Dementors.
Dementors? You little winching.
Yeah, that's quite clever. Muggles can't see Dementors, can they, boy? Highly convenient.
I'm not lying. There were 2 of them, and if I hadn't...
Enough. I'm sorry to interrupt what I'm sure would have been a very well...
In this short scene, we see that this is not at all a fair trial. During the British and Roman empires, laws were dictated by a minority group of blood-related elites and their corporate and banking henchmen. The result was a copious amount of laws based on money manipulations and religious doctrine under the guise of protecting the common good, which entombed thousands of people into their web of prison systems. During these eras, you were guilty until proven innocent. You were not entitled to a quick and speedy trial, nor were you tried by a jury of your peers. Although the Church based their laws on natural law theory, this is not the same as natural law. Natural law theory is copywritten material by the Vatican. Natural law can only be observed and applied by those who can intuit and interpret them best. America broke away from the former and created the latter. Under natural law, you had a jury of peers instead of a single overlord. The prosecutor needed to bring evidence of their claim and allow you to defend yourself with an alibi or witnesses as well. Your peers would listen to the facts and decide upon the punishment they feel is fair. This process ensures that megalomaniacs with ulterior motives were not able to impose random rules upon you just so they could ensnare you into their system. The judge was there merely as a mediator. They did not have the authority to make decisions on the jury's behalf. The jury was autonomous and had the sole authority to decide one's fate based on factual evidence that was given. In America, you were innocent until proven guilty. This is the protection of natural law. In the beginning of this scene, Harry was being railroaded. Fudge, with the help of Death Eater Lucius Malfoy, had already determined Harry was guilty. The 50 ministry staff all on one side of the room is symbolic for the government being the only ones who make and enforce the law. As we can see, there is no jury input or evidence being submitted which supports the government's claims. Just as Minister Fudge was about to give Harry a damning sentence, Dumbledore stepped in, saying we have a witness, a witch named Mrs. Plum, who saw Harry and his cousin get attacked and was able to corroborate Harry's story, allowing him to be released with all charges dropped. It was not until natural law entered the picture that the prosecutors were required to give evidence to their claims of Harry's wrongdoings. Being unable to do so, they were forced by law to let Harry go. Natural law is impartial and forces people to be accountable. But this is when Dumbledore was alive. After Dumbledore's death, we see the full corruption of the court system in the Deathly Hallows, where you were guilty until you could persuade your masters otherwise. Dolores Umbridge is the judge in this movie, deciding who is punished based on however she feels. Umbridge is a controlling, power-hungry woman who has no interest in rights or public safety, just gaining and maintaining her position of authority over others. This unbridled R-complex of hers is why she is the one wearing the Horcrux. In the Deathly Hallows, Harry, Ron, and Hermione disguise themselves as Ministry agents. Ron's wife is on trial because she's half Muggle, and in Voldemort's world, anyone who isn't pureblood must be subjugated. While on trial, the wife, Mary, was accused of stealing her own wand. She responded to Umbridge's questioning, "I didn't steal it. I got it from Diagon Alley when I was 11.
At Ollivanders when I was 11. It chose me.
You're lying. Wands only choose witches, and you are not a witch.
But I am. Tell them, Rich, tell them what I am.
Umbridge has no interest in justice. Obviously, she can easily call the wand maker and ask for a copy of his sale records. Or better yet, call Hogwarts for a copy of her transcripts. But she doesn't, because courts are no longer about justice. Voldemort wants to subjugate and control the masses, and Umbridge is obliging because she wants the same thing. She wants to feel on top. And unfortunately, Mary's situation isn't too far removed from our present condition. I will be looking at American laws because I am American and that's what I'm familiar with. However, I do know that nearly all countries, including England, Australia, and Canada, have a similar set of laws. In short, if your country has registered citizenship and a large centralized banking system, you're most likely under a similar set of laws that we are. After the stock market crash in 1929, Americans were offered FDR's New Deal in 1933. Before 1933, Americans were considered private citizens, governed by natural law. Natural law is immutable. It never changes because it's based on the principles of nature, such as all men are created equal. And these principles are what our common laws are based in. Under this system, each adult was considered the king or queen of their own property, and even their property is recognized as a separate nation, which the king or queen reserved the right to do as they please, so long as it did not harm the life or property of another. This is why private citizens are said to have the right to create and enforce their own laws to a degree. Laws are based in property rights. When you truly own something, you have the right to dictate what happens to and within that object. For example, if you own a home, you have the right to discriminate who does and does not enter your property, as well as govern what people do inside of it. Property rights equals individual rights. As a private citizen and royalty of your own estate, you decide upon your individual rules. The only law that's universal is the law of doing no harm, because if you're a royal, that means your neighbor is too. Private citizens and natural law rule under the republic. But America isn't solely a republic. She is a democratic republic. There are actually two sets of laws governing America. The republic is for private citizens living on the land, and the democracy governs international corporations under maritime law. The head of this maritime corporate democracy is the District of Columbia. Washington, D.C. follows public international law to govern international corporations that are registered with them. All registered businesses must adhere to these public laws, such as paying taxes, permits, and licenses. If they choose to add private rules in addition to these public laws, such as mandating a uniform, they are allowed to do so. Washington, D.C. is the government for corporations that are registered with it. And that's because D.C. is actually a corporation itself. In other words, Washington, D.C. is considered a separate entity and was not originally a government to the private people. Their public international laws are actually private to them, meaning their laws did not affect the American national. The Founding Fathers separated us from corporations. The democracy governs Washington, D.C. and her corporations under maritime law, and the republic governs everyone else under natural and common law. All of your political parties, Republican, Democrat, Green Party, Libertarian, all of that is for the corporate maritime state. The regular man and woman didn't need it because they represented themselves. That's what town meetings and a jury of peers were for. Let the community decide what's best based on principle and not the random dictates of corporate elites. Before 1933, the laws that Washington, D.C. passed were exclusively for international corporations which were registered with them. With the New Deal, American nationals contracted for lifetime employment with the Democratic Maritime Corporation. With this contract, we changed to public citizens and are now subject to public international law in the form of maritime law. As a private citizen, you govern yourself. As a public citizen, a corporation governs you. In other words, when you become a public citizen of Washington, D.C., you have elected for an international corporation to stand in as your government. When your parents register your name through the birth certificate, this de facto government creates a trust with your legal name, placing themselves as trustee and the legal name as beneficiary. Now that they have legal title and control of the name, known as a straw man, they also gain control of everything that's under the name, including the deed to your home, your vehicles, weapons, and children. Through licenses, permits, and registrations, we have given up our property rights and therefore our sovereignty. This is why the de facto government has the right to charge property taxes, enforce traffic laws, command your children to undergo their education system, and so on. Through the legal name, your property is now under their control. Unfortunately, this affects us in the courtroom as well. In common law courts, people represent themselves, unless they're a minor or mentally incapable, in which case those individuals would employ the help of a lawyer. Judges are there more as a referee, and the jury of peers makes the final decision. Judges in maritime admiralty courts, however, have a much greater role. Admiralty courts preside over corporate disputes. Unlike people, corporations neither have bodies nor mouths, and therefore cannot appear in court to represent themselves, which is why lawyers are mandatory. Logically, admiralty courts don't need a jury of peers. Imagine if Starbucks was on trial. Who would be their peers? Coffee Bean, Seattle's Best, and Pete's Coffee? Whether or not Starbucks is actually guilty is besides the point. They're going to put them in prison just to eliminate their competition. That's why there aren't juries in admiralty court, and the judge is the ruling authority. It is not about people's rights. It's about corporate rules. But all that was before 1933. The New Deal was a new contract. A contract for the regular man and woman, that if they agreed to become employees of corporate Washington, D.C., that D.C. would protect and aid them through welfare and public works. Over 60 million maritime laws later, America has the highest percentage of people in prison. Prisons where your local Tennessee stoner is now doing 15 years making Victoria's Secret panties for $2 an hour. Unfortunately, our modern courts have come full circle, going back to their medieval roots of justice. When we became public citizens, we essentially turned our backs on natural law. Now we are solely governed by the random dictates of corporate elites under maritime law. Nowadays, the jury of peers is just a show in most cases. Under maritime law, we now have mandatory minimums, regardless of how the jury feels about it. If any juryman goes against the wishes of the judge, that juryman can go to prison alongside the alleged perpetrator. Have you ever heard of plea deals? It's just another maritime contract where you completely bypass jury input altogether. And let's take a look at who's in the courtroom. The judge is paid by the feds. The prosecuting lawyer is paid by the feds, as well as many defense lawyers. Everyone in the room is paid by the feds. And the feds, spoiler, are a corporation themselves, taking their orders from foreign creditors. As of 1933, public citizens are no longer under the protections of natural law. But not all is lost. If one chooses, one can return to the Republic, allowing them to discharge most public debts and prison sentences, giving us freedom and regaining our property rights, and therefore our individual rights. But as Harry demonstrates, reclaiming your sovereignty will be an uphill battle. Seeing the injustice of Mary's court hearing, Harry, our natural law-following Jesus, grabbed the Horcrux, freeing the woman on trial. The Horcrux was later destroyed by using the Sword of Gryffindor. In esotericism, the sword, and more specifically the Ace of Swords from the tarot, is symbolic for truth and a new idea taking hold. Being the sword of Godric Gryffindor, that new idea is the upholding and adherence to natural law, the only antidote to an empire. Another Horcrux was found in a bank vault in the form of a chalice. A charm was placed on all the objects in the vault so that every time somebody touched something, it would duplicate itself in mass. As I suggested earlier, the banks of an empire work in tandem with governments in order to dominate and control the population. You could even make a solid argument that banks really run the show, since nearly all governments are indebted to them, and therefore indebted to the minority group of people who own those banks. As Voldemort gained power and control over the world, the economy simultaneously tanked. Starting with the Half-Blood Prince, an increasing number of popular stores went out of business. Once Voldemort had full control over the government through his prime minister puppet, most families dropped into near-poverty conditions. At the same time, we see Voldemort's cohorts get promotions and bigger paychecks. The population is being drained from their wealth and siphoned to an elite cabal. This is exemplified with the Weasley family just getting by, whereas the Malfoys live in abundance. And mirrored in Hogwarts, where in the Deathly Hallows, the Slytherins ruled the school while the Gryffindors lived impoverished. We see this trend outside the wizarding community as well, where the rich get richer. The economic system Americans contracted for in 1933 and spread across the globe derives its inspiration from the ancient Babylonian practice of usury, which is the action of making money out of nothing. Mercantilism, the father of capitalism, originated in Rome and the Middle East. With this system, goods were traded overseas for the purpose of turning a profit for coin, not merely to barter and trade. But when Rome fell, Europe's economy contracted and localized, entering them into the Dark Ages where their economy, education, health, and scientific progress came to a halt. But in North Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Islamic Spain, mercantilism continued, allowing them to thrive. In the 11th and 13th centuries, an empire of enlightened warrior monks rediscovered the secrets of the East, formed the Knights Templar, and ushered Europe into her Renaissance. The Templars' membership was taken from the cream of European aristocracy. They took a vow of poverty upon joining, and each initiate remitted considerable money and property to the group. The Templars set up autonomous city-states called preceptories, where they farmed their own food, ran their own hospitals, and manufactured arms, textiles, and other goods. This allowed them to issue loans with interest, mostly to other aristocratic and royal families. Instead of trading with gold and silver coins, they mainly traded in encrypted chits, which is a piece of paper representing a promise to pay in the future, and the right for the recipient to collect their payment in gold or silver at the bank branch of their choice. When in the case of a loan, the Templars gave a piece of paper and in return received actual gold as payment due to the interest. This part of the equation is usury. Stories began to leak from disgruntled ex-members about secret initiation rituals and that an inner circle of Templars were running the show with a hidden agenda. The Templars' power threatened not only the monarchs of the time, since most of them were indebted to the Templars, but also Pope Clement V, who no longer had control over them. The Templars were arrested en masse on Friday, October 13th, 1307, on charges of idol worship and heresy. Throughout their preceptories, human skulls were discovered which appeared to have ceremonial significance. They also found carvings of Baphomet, who the Templars admitted caused the land to germinate and made them rich. In their crusades, the Templars had come across the cult of Amalthea, who was a she-goat represented by the constellation Capricorn. Amalthea and Capricorn are representative of nature, fertility, wisdom, plenteousness, and by extension, wealth. For this reason, Templars often kept statuettes of Baphomet in their money coffers. After the Templars were disbanded, mercantilism and banking continued mainly with Italian families. One popular banking family were the Medicis, who are said to be related to the royal and noble families associated with the former Knights Templar. Duke René d'Anjou was also a descendant of Templar families and is rumored to have been the Grand Master of a Templar splinter group called the Priory of Sion. D'Anjou employed Christopher Columbus to explore the West, inspecting North America's wealth, and had close connections with the banker Cosimo de' Medici. To put it plainly, we have two Templar descendants working together. One looks for resources, and the other is the banker. The Priory of Sion later adopted the subtitle Ormus, who was an Egyptian alchemist from 46 AD. It is said that there are 13 stages to alchemy. The first stage is the prima materia, or first matter, which is the ubiquitous, universal starting material. It's the primitive, formless base of all matter, similar to chaos and ether. According to 1920s alchemist Fulcanelli, the philosopher's mercury is the first matter. The egg which requires gradual cooking in order to be transformed, first into the red sulfur, then into elixir, and third into the universal medicine. At the end, you have the refined and perfected philosopher's stone, which is said to give immortality and turn lead into gold. This can translate to many things. Taken literally, when one adds mercury to sulfur and salt, it becomes a universal solvent, which can literally extract gold and silver from lead. In spagyrics, which is the practice of alchemical herbal medicine, the process involves fermentation, distillation, and extraction of mineral components from the ash of plants. The trend between all forms of alchemy is the process of repeatedly breaking things down in order to extract the pure essence of that object, or human. Alchemy can even carry over to the creation of wealth and banking, as illustrated by Wolfgang von Goethe's 1774 play called Faust. In the play, the main character is an alchemist who won the king's favor with the devil's help by offering him the secret of alchemy, which is how to create wealth by printing paper money. The main character convinces the king to issue promissory notes based on gold to be mined in the future. Soon, the king presided over a robust economy and an immoral, materialistic people. But eventually, the currency collapsed and left the people in poverty and ruin. To turn lead into gold is the equivalent of turning paper into money, which is what the Templars and Medicis did. Under the multiplication principle demonstrated by alchemist John Law during his management over France's National Banque Royale, a bank can take money from its depositors' accounts and lend it out to various persons or institutions on interest. Classically, the bank will loan out 90% of what they have, leaving only 10% in the vault. When the loans are paid back with real gold, the bank earns a profit as well as causing the depositor's money to multiply. This is why I believe that everything the trio touched inside the bank vault reproduced itself in mass. Only one of that object is the original. Only one of that silver platter actually exists. The rest is an artificial copy, symbolizing the paper promissory note. With this visual, we can see how money is used to make more money, hearkening back to the alchemical principle, to make gold, you must have gold. The alchemists believed that they could take a small sample of gold, which they called the metallic seed, and use their magic to increase it exponentially. But just as in Faust and the collapse of Rome, when the witch's charm is undone, all the duplicates disappear, leaving just the original in their stead. Shortly before the Knights Templars' execution, they passed their teachings to the Freemasons, who went on to found the United States of America. The District of Columbia was created by taking the land masses from Virginia and Maryland, alluding that the goddess Columbia is the Virgin Mary. Even George Washington took his oath of office dressed in Masonic regalia and his hand resting on the Masonic Bible. Fast forward to 1933, corporate DC went bankrupt, so Freemason Roosevelt passed laws forcing the private citizens to give their gold and silver to the feds in exchange for an equivalent amount of paper dollars. The following year, the feds devalued the dollar relative to gold, causing all who made the exchange to lose 41% of the value of their money. The feds paid their international debts with the gold they took, leading to a steady loss in wealth until 1971, when Richard Nixon announced to foreign banks that the U.S. dollar would no longer be redeemed in gold. Now, the value of the dollar floats freely with no fixed standard of value. Thus, it can be manipulated by the market and actions of the Federal Reserve. These paper dollars have absolutely nothing of intrinsic value backing them, bringing us back to the Templar chit and promissory notes in Faust. This type of money is known as fiat currency. The term fiat means by declaration. The dollar bill is money only because the banks and government declare it as such, and we agree to use it as such. Unlike gold or silver, it has no intrinsic value beyond what our minds put into it. This is why our paper currency has the Masonic motto, "In God we trust." Everyone must believe. Only then do the worthless pieces of paper take on value. This system depends entirely on a religious faith by the American people in the supernatural power of the dollar. The operation of the economy is metaphysical. King Solomon's treasure, the lost treasure of the Knights Templar, and America's wealth are not vast hoards of gold, but rather a formula for creating wealth. Fiat currency does have potential wealth, however. As the unofficial advisor to Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt, British economist John Maynard Keynes perfected the alchemical process of turning paper into money by adding the element of work, to make up a random task for people to do in order to win the lucky prize of these promissory notes. With the introduction of fiat currency, money is no longer based in material wealth, but instead is based in human labor measured over time. Even our credit system is based in never-ending work. Good credit comes not just from having money, but specifically from having a regular income that continues over time. People who are billionaires but have no regular income to replenish it will have trouble renting or borrowing. This forces them to sacrifice their time continually. The economy has been set up so as to force the individuals involved to engage in some form of work, no matter how useless, in order to complete the alchemical transformation. Those who own our time own our life, as evidenced by our social security system, which turned every public citizen into a securitized asset, which is controlled by the government, who are controlled by their creditors, who are represented by the Federal Reserve. When you compound this with the government decreasing production and employment, while simultaneously pumping the economy with fiat dollars, the inevitable inflation bubble appears and then bursts. And if you're the owner of the banking institution that has collateral rights, crashing an economy would be beneficial to your personal wallet. Think about it. You give people a piece of paper, and in return, they give you their labor and products derived from it. And if they default, they give you their property, their land, their business, vehicles, homes, etc. No matter what, the, quote, lender walks away with something of value in hand, even though they never lent you anything of real worth to begin with. And that's just the local level. Imagine if you can place an entire country in debt. Or better yet, multiple countries. If you have control of a government that has control of everyone's straw man, then you are essentially the sole dictator of a worldwide empire. The people who lent you nothing walk away with everything, and their alchemical process is complete. The goal is to have every country contribute whatever it has, including labor, at the lowest price possible, to form the perfect, most efficient assembly line. The natural effect of this system is a surplus in labor and therefore unemployment. That's how they're able to drive the cost of labor down to the lowest possible amount. This undoubtedly leads to slavery, albeit a tiered form of it. This pyramid scheme is built for channeling the life energy of the many into the hands of a few. The corruption of banks from pretty much all the countries, especially in the West, is exemplified by Harry finding the Horcrux in the bank vault. Alchemy was also mentioned in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, when Hermione researched Nicholas Flamel. Flamel was a real and famous French alchemist who, in Harry's first year, we learn just celebrated his 665th birthday. Why do you think Rowling chose such a specific number? Flamel is only 1 year away from 666, the infamous mark of the beast. What we know about the Templars and Freemasons is that they practice alchemy, especially in their banking. Both sing praise to Capricorn, who is Baphomet, the devil, and the beast, which is confirmed by German Freemason von Goethe in his play Faust, when he connects the alchemist with the devil. Alchemist Flamel, in conjunction with the beastly 666, is symbolic for our corrupted economic system, where we employ usury and fiat currency. We've all heard the verse, "You cannot serve both God and mammon." Mammon being a Syriac word meaning riches. In other words, you can't expect freedom and abundance in a materialistic and debaucherous society. When Harry smashed the stone, he simultaneously eliminated Flamel's life source, symbolically wounding our current economic system, which will be completely defeated or collapsed when Harry destroys the Horcrux. Again, Harry is symbolic for the upholding of natural law. Once your money is predominantly based in real-world tangible assets, your economy stabilizes. There won't be an inflation bubble followed by a sudden crash, and therefore you won't become enslaved to a worthless piece of paper, owned and controlled by nefarious people. Economic freedom, I feel, is symbolized by Harry releasing the dragon from the bank. Several Horcruxes were found in Hogwarts itself. In Harry's 5th year, Hogwarts is taken over by Dolores Umbridge, who's employed by the Ministry of Magic. As High Headmaster, placing herself above Dumbledore, Umbridge introduces us to OWLs, which stands for Ordinary Wizarding Levels. The OWLs are a series of tests to grade the student's knowledge of magic. The school books she passes out have 1950s cartoon images on the cover. Based on the class's reaction, the government-sanctioned text is primitive and juvenile. As Umbridge passes out the books, she says, "You'll be following a carefully constructed, ministry-approved
course of defensive magic." Yes.
There's nothing in here about using defensive spells?
Using spells? Well, I can't imagine why you would need to use spells in my classroom.
We're not going to use magic.
You will be learning about defensive spells in a secure, risk-free way.
Well, what use is that? If we're going to be attacked, it won't be risk-free.
It is the view of the Ministry that a theoretical knowledge will be sufficient to get you through your examinations, which, after all, is what school is all about.
Here, we have the Ministry taking over education. The first thing they do is shift the focus of school from learning real-world skills to memorizing theory and regurgitating it back on a test. Instead of encouraging independent thought, students are encouraged to memorize what their teachers tell them, and what their teachers tell them is dictated by the Ministry. This is not unlike our present system of education. It seems like every 10 years, more vocational classes are cut in favor for more extensive and rigorous tests on the remaining subjects. Instead of learning geometry by sewing or through architecture, students memorize formulas without their real-world context. In this way, reality becomes abstracted and trivial. You're congratulated for remembering random facts in random order, but are never encouraged to look or think more deeply. Schools from kindergarten to university cultivate group thinking instead of individual and critical thought. An even greater loss in education is the fact that basic life skills aren't taught. There's the obvious, where we don't have home economics or shop classes, etc. But in addition, we're not even taught how to function in this man-made society. We're not taught about the law or how to file taxes, and in my case, we didn't even have driver's ed or health class. Our education is not about helping individuals. It's about helping corporations and those who own them. We're encouraged to be proficient in math, science, and reading, but we're not encouraged to take up skills that could give us our independence back and remove us from the shackles of corporatocracy. Schools program students to be monkeys. Good monkeys are given A's, bad monkeys and non-monkeys are failed and barred from a comfortable existence after graduating. This grading system conditions children and therefore adults on what is considered valuable information. Whomsoever is the best at performing in school is perceived as having superior intelligence and are given greater weight in making decisions for the collective. If you have a high social IQ, that doesn't matter because it's not on the test. If you have a high spiritual IQ, it doesn't matter because it's not on the test. If you have a high artistic IQ, it doesn't matter. If you're good with your hands, it doesn't matter. If you're a good homemaker and are family and community oriented, it doesn't matter. You're only a genius if you can perform well in math and science, or if you're the 1% of artists who can make $500,000 or more per year. But the genius of the best artist is still inferior to the genius of the best scientist. One pattern I have observed is that it is always the right hemispheric individual who is cut out and belittled. Schools promote left hemispheric thinking. Esoterically, the left hemisphere of the brain is associated with the masculine. It deals with linear, analytical thought and compartmentalization. The right hemisphere is associated with the feminine. It's the part of our brain dealing with creativity, intuition, relationships, and is alinear. All of these things, in all of their forms, are mostly excluded in school and by extension devalued in society. What is the effect of devaluing the sacred feminine in a culture? Well, what do you see? Broken homes, non-existent communities, and therefore non-existent support systems, resulting in mental illness, war and violence, inequality, and a dying planet. I would argue that feminism often devalues the sacred feminine too. It does not elevate the above-mentioned topics to an equal standing of the masculine. Instead, it just elevates masculine, left hemispheric women. Now don't get me wrong, be who you are, I don't care. My mother is very masculine. She has a lot of Aries and Mars in her, and I don't have a problem with that, except for the usual complaint you have with that personality type. My point is, don't forget about the Venetians. They're often exploited, but rarely equal. I feel that those in power have extensive knowledge of the occult and program us in educational institutions where the sacred feminine is purposefully and repeatedly devalued. Italian Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci suggested that conquering a nation militaristically is not the way to spread ideology. You must do it by conquering a nation culturally. To culturally weaken its people, weaken the sexes, divide the population via race, gender, and whatever else. Conquer people through cultural means by marching the young through the cultural institutions. I don't think our government actually cares about whether or not the majority of us can do calculus. They just want to fire up our left hemispheres as much as possible during the formative years of our lives. Schools program left hemispheric students to believe that their intelligence is the highest man can accomplish. By extension, their direct opposite right hemispheric counterparts, therefore, have a primitive and retrograding mind devoid of any real value or progressive purpose, aside from beauty. When students become adults and are unleashed into society, they're predominantly left hemispheric to varying degrees. But when we look at how the elites communicate, they're communicating to the right hemisphere and not the left. Symbols in movies, music videos, commercials, and logos are how things are communicated. They purposefully neglect to stimulate our right hemispheres in school, going as far to tell people it's unimportant and not worth knowing. Then they turn around and create a right hemispheric language to communicate with. This allows them to tell us what they're doing straight to our faces, and most don't even know it. And an even fewer percentage will be able to fully decipher it. And those who can are labeled crazy by the left hemispheric masses for having an uncommon ability to translate right hemispheric language. Recently, we've seen the transition from the state standards to federal standards through Common Core. Its title, Common Core, is interesting and makes me think of the ordinary wizard in OWLs. Common and ordinary is how our de facto government wants us to be. We're not going to be raising any Einsteins with this new rhetoric, and perhaps that's by design.
Joy Pullman, Pullman. Joy, who works at the Heartland Institute in Chicago, she has written the definitive article on the 5 people who wrote Common Core. 5. They had some help at the lower levels, but there are 5 people responsible for the standards, but all 5 working in those 2 lobbyist groups. Do you know that the 5 people who wrote Common Core have very little experience with education and no experience with national standards at all? The man chiefly responsible for the standards is a man by the name of David Coleman, C-O-L-E-M-A-N. David Coleman is the architect of Common Core. It says so on his own Wikipedia page. And yet, David Coleman has never taught a classroom. He's never taught in his life. He has no formal training in education at all. Not a degree. Not a course. The man most responsible for the standards has never been an educator. He's the guy responsible. And you're going to love this. No sooner did David Coleman oversee the writing of the Common Core standards than he immediately left Common Core and miraculously became the president of the college boards, where the same man who wrote Common Core is now rewriting your kids' entrance exams to college, the ACTs and the SATs in particular. The same man who wrote Common Core, who you never heard of, who's never been elected to anything, who's never been a teacher or an educator, is now in control of the SATs, the exams your kids are going to have to take to get into college, and he's rewritten them to conform to Common Core. You see what I mean by banana republic? Nobody knows who this guy is. He has no education credentials. Not only has he transformed your kids' schools, but now he's going to force your kids to study Common Core under the threat that they won't get into college if they don't. That's pretty shocking. That's who David Coleman is. So 5 individuals and 2 lobbyist groups. Who paid for all of this? Well, go back to 2007, 8, and 9. Bill Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As you sit here today, Bill Gates has spent over $6 billion on Common Core, advertising it, propagandizing it, giving big monetary grants to groups who support it. As a matter of fact, there's not a major educational organization in this country that supports Common Core that was not paid by Bill Gates to do so. The National PTA, right? We think of the Parent Teachers Association, we think of somebody looking out for our kids. Yet the National PTA received multiple $million-dollar checks from Bill Gates back in 2009. And the National PTA was advertising and promoting Common Core in the States before the standards were even written. Before anybody at the PTA even knew what they were going to be, they were bought by Gates to push this to your kids. Why did 170 Roman Catholic diocese schools take Common Core the very first year they could without being even asked to by the feds? Well, could it be that the NCEA, the chief watchdog of our Catholic schools, the National Catholic Education Association, they took hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s in money from Bill Gates to push this in the Catholic schools? Think about that for a second. The only thing Bill Gates has donated more of his money to than Common Core is abortion, eugenics, and population control in Africa. How does that partner up with the Catholic Church? But that's why your Catholic schools took this, because they were paid to do so. Look at the major educational organizations that all support Common Core, all of them. Because Bill Gates' charitable foundation, the Gates Foundation, it's a public trust. You can see online where they spent their money. And they spent their money buying support for this. There's no other way to look at it. Can I ask you, what qualifies Bill Gates? What are his education credentials? Isn't he the guy that dropped out of college because it was absolutely worthless and opened a company in a garage and made $1 billion? What are his credentials for this? 5 individuals, 2 Washington lobbyists, paid for by Bill and Melinda Gates. So that's how it happened. And you know the irony? The people who defend Common Core don't even dispute this anymore. The evidence is too obvious. It's all out there. That's how do you call this state-led? What I'm going to do as I go through this talk today is I'm going to set up the 5 biggest lies of Common Core. That's number 1, that this is state-led. Their own copyright belies them. This is how it was done. So all right, so you've proved, more or less, because you're going to verify it, you've proved that Common Core isn't state-led. But that doesn't mean it's federal. How do you know it's federal? Well, who controls public education in this country? The Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education. Do you honestly think the federal government would allow somebody to do this if they didn't want it done? You've been watching government, the American government, for the last 30, 40 years. This is a government that spends all of its time letting you do less so it can do more. Do you think the Department of Education would have allowed 5 individuals and 2 lobbyist groups and 1 billionaire to completely transform the public schools if they didn't want it done? And I don't care how much money Bill Gates has. He has no ability whatsoever to buy this into the schools. He bought the support of the Parent Teachers Association, but they can't put it in your schools. He bought the support of the NCEA, but he can't force that into the Catholic schools. There's only one entity in this country that could have done it. That's your federal government. In 2009, the federal government created the Federal Race to the Top program. It was basically touted as a stimulus for education. The president and Arne Duncan, your Secretary of Education, they encouraged all 50 states in the union to apply for Race to the Top grant money. And 46 received it. 46 states got some. The big deal about the Race to the Top program was it was a federal giveaway. So I'll give you an example. In 2009, New York became the very first state in the union to win a Race to the Top grant. New York received $700 million of taxpayer funds in 2009. That money went directly to the New York State Board of Education. They could spend it on anything they wanted to. Computers, tetherballs, substitute teachers. Do you know what the only meaningful provision for any state that took Race to the Top money was? Any state that took Race to the Top money had to accept the Common Core state standards when they were finally written. That's how 46 states got it without ever seeing them. Your states were bribed into taking Common Core. Because you know, right, that the federal government of the United States is by law prohibited from creating national standards or a national curriculum. 3 different federal statutes from 1965 prohibit the federal government from creating national standards and national curriculum. In fact, go before that, the 10th Amendment to the US Constitution prohibits the federal government from meddling in state educational decisions. So what then is this copyright? It is merely a cheap attempt by the feds to indemnify themselves from the legality of this.
Along with changing the curriculum to dumb the students down, Umbridge and the ministry simultaneously evaluate teachers based on government rubric. When any teacher didn't meet the ministry's standards, Umbridge fired them. Around 2005, California instituted a state rubric for teachers called BITSA. In this program, experienced teachers would mentor newer teachers, making sure they observed the state standards. BITSA was later combined with the university credentialing process because California couldn't find enough experienced teachers who would agree to mentorship. As Duke Pesta pointed out, with the implementation of Common Core, further obligations and restrictions were placed on the teacher. After the crash in 2008, many schools in California, especially in LAUSD, were hurting for money. In came philanthropists Melanie and Richard Lundquist with $50 million donated to Villa Rugosa's Mayor's Group, where they swiftly implemented Bill Gates' vision of small schools without vocational courses. The Mayor's Group approached the teaching faculty of LAUSD and suggested that if they voted for the Mayor's Group to take over their schools, the group would create small schools, allowing for more administrative opportunities to the teachers. With Marshall Tuck as the group's leading man, as well as being a former employee of Bill Gates, nearly all vocational classes were cut from LAUSD in favor of increased focus in math, science, and academic English. We don't have art teachers anymore because we now have triple the administrators. Over 10 years later, there has been no change in test scores for LAUSD. The amount of attention focused on math, science, and English have stayed the same, as evidenced by the test scores. The only thing that actually changed was the amount of attention focused on the arts and hands-on subjects. In the beginning of the Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge introduces herself by saying progress for the sake of progress must be discouraged. Let us preserve what must be preserved, perfect what can be perfected, and prune practices that ought to be prohibited. This means that the wizarding government wants to put a cap on how much knowledge their population has. An uneducated population is easier to manipulate and control than an educated one. They will preserve what will not affect this goal and discard anything that will. Hence the ordinary wizard and common student. OWLs are the equivalent to our standardized tests. Americans have been utilizing the outcome-based education system for over 40 years, a system that prizes test scores over actual progress in knowledge. Outcome-based education is based on Soviet education, which is based in Nazi education, which is based on former Prussian military-style education. This military-style education makes me think of the Deathly Hallows, where Professor Snape became headmaster, doing Lord Voldemort's bidding. This is when we see the full militaristic implementation of Hogwarts, where the school becomes drab, oppressive, controlled, and restrictive. With the institution of Common Core, now every school in America has a spirit of Umbridge within it. Even before Common Core, I'd say starting with the Boomer generation, students no longer learn through life experiences in the 3D world. They just read about it and see pictures and videos of it through the government's pre-selected filter. With Common Core, the snake that's been coiled around the developing minds of the next generation is increasing her grip ever more tightly. Any teacher going outside the norm is obviously fired. The ruler which is used to measure the teacher's effectiveness in successfully programming their students are the endless standardized tests. So much so that there's little room to learn about anything else. In addition to limiting what children perceive of the world through outcome-based education, the powers that be have strengthened our tiered society system. The brightest students are siphoned to magnet schools where they will receive programming into a specific upper middle class to wealthy profession. The second brightest will go to charter schools where they will ease into a middle class lifestyle. All the others go to public school, those others being troubled teens, mentally or socially retarded, and immigrants who aren't fluent in English yet. These students will most likely be siphoned into the bottom poverty level. Or, if they're criminally brilliant, they will be pushed into the underground, where they'll most likely be the drug runners and cash movers for the CIA. The promise of small schools was to trick the masses into setting up the next generation of unthinking order followers, at least in LAUSD. The left hemisphere loves hierarchy, compartmentalization, and control. The right hemisphere loves equality, is fluid and passive, and she must be appeased somehow since those members of the population still exist. Government occultists know this, which is why they come prepared. Insert socialism, communism, and fascism. All are basically the same. They claim that if the population gives up their individual property to the state, that the state will take care of them and ensure equality for all.
There's already one school district here that's done it, that they're eliminating calculus from the high school because your kids won't get there. As Milgram says, where are your architects and your doctors and your engineers going to come from? So in asking him, all right, if this is not a math program designed to make kids do math well, what kind of math program is it? You know what his words were? This is social justice math. What do we mean by that? Not every kid can do math at a high level. Think about your own education. You were either really good at math or you weren't. It's one of those subjects where you get it or you don't. I never got it. But that's not fair, right? Why is it that so few kids can excel at math? That's not just. We've created a math curriculum where every kid gets comfortable doing a little bit of math, but nobody's allowed to do too much. That's the priority of the Common Core people. And what is that going to do to those kids who can legitimately do math? His evidence, among other things, and you can't make this stuff up. This is, Professor Milgram pointed this video out to us. The young woman in the video is a community organizer from the city of Chicago. And she's talking to a group of high school math teachers about the fundamental premise of Common Core math. Here's what she says.
But even under the new Common Core, even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and in oral explanations, and they showed it in the picture, but they just got the final number wrong, we're really more focusing on the how.
That's it. And I don't want to be glib about this. I understand that kids learn differently, but what she said is exactly right. We are less concerned about right answers because not everybody can get them. Every kid can play with numbers, but not every kid can get the right answer. We're more concerned about the process. The primary way that Common Core math is done at the elementary school is to put kids into groups of 2 and 3. Teachers don't teach them math. They hand the kids basic math problems. And the purpose of the assignment is not to get the right answer. It is to get all 3 kids to agree on what they think the answer is. This is the social justice component. It's community math. I'll give you an example. I actually have an exam from a 7-year-old in the state of New York. The question was 7 times 6. The little boy wrote 42. He got it marked wrong. The teacher said, the other 2 kids in your peer group agreed on a different answer. They got it right. You didn't agree with your peers, so you did not get it right. Let's do the math for a moment that our schools won't do. You're going to get 60 million American school kids to exactly the same place in every subject. By definition, is that going to be a high place or a low place? It has to be. Analogy. Nobody in the NBA looks like me. It's not just socially. But if you accommodate, you want to make the NBA available to everybody, what are you going to do to the overall quality of the play? You're not going to raise it. You're going to lower it. How is that not true for your school kids?
All New World Order nations start with programming the youth in schools to be receptive to socialist and the like ideologies as adults. But judging by Stalin's Russia, Hitler's Germany, and Mao's China, socialism and the like are a ruse to hoodwink the population into accepting totalitarian rule. In Russia, Germany, and China, these isms were used to take the property from the people, eliminate anybody that couldn't or wouldn't work for them, and then enslave the survivors, ensuring that the wealth of all the land was directly funneled to the elites. Although it was adults that implemented socialism in these countries, they were children once. Children who went to school and became culturally primed and conditioned to welcome this ideology. Again, a fact not too far removed from our present situation in the West. Through the university systems in America, Canada, and Europe, socialist and communist ideology is propagated. This is why we see the millennial generation favoring people like Bernie Sanders, a socialist Democrat. According to a poll in the Washington Times, 58% of millennials say they would rather live in a socialist, communist, or fascist nation than a capitalist one. Schools are in charge of molding us into the next batch of worker bees. They have become our providers, protectors, and disciplinarians, and they raise us up like domesticated cattle. So far, we've seen Voldemort take over the court system, economic system, and school system, stripping people from their justice, wealth, and education. Starting with the Daily Prophet, he took over the media as well. The Goblet of Fire is when we're first introduced to reporter Rita Skeeter and the Daily Prophet newspaper. In this movie, Voldemort has his frail body, so although weak, he has a bit of a hold on the population, best exemplified by Rita herself. Based on the way she dresses and carries herself, saying things like, "Of course you know who I am," we see that Rita has a need to be famous, to have her stories on the cover of the most prestigious newspaper. Because of her need for self-importance, her character is easily corruptible, choosing to exaggerate and sensationalize her stories rather than tell the naked truth. There was a scuttlebutt in Harry's 4th year because Harry was admitted into the Wizarding Championship even though he was underage. In his interview with Rita, she would ask him questions like, "So tell me, Harry, here you sit, a mere boy of 12. Harry interrupted, "I'm 14. Already, we can see that Rita doesn't research her stories much. Rita ignored Harry's correction and continued, "Do you think it was the trauma of your past
that made you so keen to enter such a dangerous tournament?"
No, I didn't enter.
Of course you didn't. Everyone loves a rebel, Harry. Scratch that last. Speaking of your parents, were they alive? How do you think they'd feel? Proud or concerned that your attitude shows at best a pathological need for attention, at worst a psychotic death wish?
Hey, my eyes aren't glistening with the ghost of my past.
Instead of trying to investigate the truth of Harry's story, Rita enters the room with the preconceived idea that she knows Harry cheated. The interview was just for show. The article she produced is opinion and conjecture based on what she believed, coupled with what would give her the most notoriety. Rita writes a gossip column, passing itself as real news. At the end of Harry's 4th year, he and fellow contestant Cedric Diggory were transported to Voldemort, where Cedric was promptly murdered. Harry managed to get away, bringing Cedric's body with him. When they arrived back at Hogwarts, Harry told Dumbledore and the reporters that Voldemort was back. And this nugget of truth is what Voldemort and his cohorts wanted to hide from the world. When Voldemort has his full body in Harry's 5th year, we see the media print propaganda about Harry and Dumbledore being liars, as well as insinuating that Dumbledore is crazy. In one scene, Lupin tells Harry that Minister Fudge is using all his power and influence at the Daily Prophet to smear anyone who claims the Dark Lord has returned. With this statement, it's confirmed, at least in the wizarding world, that the government has the power to dictate what a newspaper writes. The Death Eater's protection is hinged on the fact that nobody knows about them, that nobody knows a minority group of people are conspiring to steal, murder, and enslave the rest of the population. They do this through inserting themselves into positions of power. By controlling the few, they control the many. If people knew that those in top-level positions of power were all in on the same game, we would be able to clearly see how they manipulate us and therefore break our bondage of servitude. Only by hiding their affiliations with each other can they rile the masses up into fighting themselves instead of fighting them. When Harry enters the Gryffindor common room, everyone goes silent and watches him. A fellow student, Seamus, angrily accused Harry, exclaiming, "The Daily Prophet has been saying a lot of things about you and Dumbledore." Nobody was there the night Cedric died, accusing Harry of being the murderer so that he could win the tournament. Of course, nobody has time to research every little detail around the world. That is the importance of the reporter. Their sole job is to uncover truths and share it with others. But when the truth giver starts chasing fame and fortune and the readers become complacent and lazy, we have a problem. We see the slow devolving of the Daily Prophet, which would be the equivalent to the New York Times, Huffington Post, and the like. An alleged prestigious and trustworthy source for news becoming a tool of propaganda against anyone who uncovers Voldemort's conspiracy. As the Daily Prophet grows in corruption, the alternative conspiratorial news grows in influence through the Quibbler. As Harry walked through the forest, he ran into Luna Lovegood, the daughter of the man who writes the Quibbler. Luna tells Harry that she and her father believe him, that Voldemort is back, that Harry fought him, and that the Ministry is conspiring against him and Dumbledore. Because of her alternative and offbeat nature, Luna's nickname around school is Loony Lovegood, harkening back to the stereotype of the crazy conspiracy theorist. We've all heard this term, but after 2016, it has really taken hold through Donald Trump and the alt-right. I would like to point out that the media has linked conspiracies to a political party. That's your first clue that the truth movement has been weaponized. Truth doesn't have a party because it's the truth. It stands alone. I see the news media speak with already famous alt-right personalities such as Alex Jones, Ben Shapiro, Kanye West, Richard Spencer, and Jared Taylor. I never see them speak with unpolished YouTubers like Clint Richardson, Mark Passio, or Santos Bonacci. There are many people who could just as easily be interviewed, but you never hear of them. I feel the famous alt-news personalities we see on TV are being used as pawns. They're disinformation agents used to make real researchers and their following look crazy, bigoted, stupid, or racist, so those around us won't heed our warnings. Whilst using these characters as an excuse, big corporate honchos like Google, YouTube, and Facebook target everyday people like me, who have differing observations. In the Deathly Hallows, we see how dark the media becomes when Voldemort finally rules everything. In these movies, the Daily Prophet is used for blatant propaganda. Just as the Nazis printed racist material about the Jewish, the Daily Prophet considers Muggles to be a danger to society and therefore should be subjugated. Witches and wizards who are half Muggle have their wands confiscated, are tried, and often incarcerated, even receiving the Dementor's kiss, which can be likened to a death sentence. Because Mr. Lovegood had been sharing truths in his Quibbler, Luna is kidnapped and their home is destroyed. In addition, the Daily Prophet names Harry as undesirable number 1 and a fugitive of the state. With Harry and the Quibbler, we see the truth is being targeted. I feel this the most from 2016 to present, with the shadow banning on social media, the deletion of accounts, labeling some of us as domestic terrorists, and suspected murder of many researchers and natural healers. One more level up, we see the divisive nature of the alt-right movement. By using inflammatory figures such as lifetime actor Donald Trump, lifetime actor Alex Jones, and mind-controlled Kanye West, they are turning people away from the founding principles of our republic, that being natural law. Natural law goes by many names, two being the unwritten law and God's law. The alt-right typically are Christian, and if you look at the original mystic Jesus, he spoke of natural law. Even though most modern Christians are also corrupted by their institutionalized system of control, their book, when properly deciphered, can instruct an individual on how to destroy an empire and live independently. These are the truths the establishment are trying to destroy. By making the alt-right and Christians hated through manipulations and propaganda, they slowly convince American youth to overthrow their own protective measures. And this is why many truthers pop up in financial ruin, are imprisoned, or are suicided altogether. To quote Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law in the Age of Aquarius, everywhere his government is taking root. The childlike confidence in progress, combined with the nightmare fear of catastrophe, against which we are yet half willing to take precautions. Consider the popularity of the cinema, the wireless, the football pools, and guessing competitions, all devices for soothing fractious infants, no seed of purpose in them. We suppress the individual in more and more ways. We think in terms of the herd. Every new measure of the most democratic governments is communistic in essence. It is always restriction. The Shops Act, motoring laws, the censorship, they won't trust us to cross the road at will. The dictators suppress all art, literature, theater, music, and news that does not meet their requirements. Yet the world only moves by the light of genius. The herd will be destroyed en masse. The abnormal man who foresees the trend of the times and adapts circumstance intelligently is laughed at and persecuted, often destroyed by the herd. But he and his heirs, when the crisis comes, are survivors. Over and over again, we see Voldemort's henchmen disguising themselves and their true affiliations, being inserted into positions of power, authority, and influence. The secret cabal is a highly organized group of individuals who conspire to overthrow Dumbledore, natural law, and anyone who stands for it, like Harry and the House of Gryffindor. This isn't too far removed from our present state of affairs. I know we've all heard of the infamous Illuminati, but in colloquial terms, Illuminati is a catch-all, a general label for powerful people who run in nefarious circles. According to Britannica.com, the original Illuminati is a 15th century organization which applied to various groups of persons who claimed to be unusually enlightened. According to adherents, the source of the light was viewed as being directly communicated from a higher source or due to a clarified and exalted condition of the human intelligence. You can research what it is for yourself, but from my understanding in a nutshell, it's one of many spiritual philosophies and practices which study ancient metaphysics and the classical liberal arts. These are the sciences of the Golden Age. This is our occulted information such as astrology, numerology, alchemy, spagyrics, the trivium, quadrivium, etc. Cultures from all around the world and all throughout time have their allegorical version of these natural phenomena. From Sumer to Egypt to the ancient Greeks, Romans, Aztecs, Mayans, Japanese, Chinese, Koreans, Indians, the Druids, French, Hopi, Navajo, and Dogons. All of these ancient cultures had very similar gods because all of them studied nature, both the external environment and the effects it has on our internal psychology. The ancients knew of scientific phenomena that quantum physicists are only now rediscovering. Every star and moving body possesses electric and magnetic forces in varying degrees. Dr. Thelma Moss from UCLA found that the cosmic field influences the Earth's magnetic field, which then influences the electrical character of the transmissions of our nervous system. Also at UCLA is Dr. Valerie Hunt, who created a Mu room, also known as a Faraday cage. This room gave scientists the ability to adjust the levels of electromagnetic energy and particles in the room. In one experiment, Dr. Hunt depleted all of the electromagnetism. As a result, the subjects burst into tears and sobbed. Although they reported that they weren't feeling sad, their bodies responded as though they were threatened. Conversely, when the field was increased to higher than normal, the subjects' thinking became clear and they reported an expansion in consciousness. To take things a few steps further, the ancients knew that every few thousand years, our Earth changes position in the galaxy, exposing us to different levels of electromagnetism. In the West, we know this as the 4 ages: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. India calls it yugas, and the Hopi and Navajo call it the 5 Earths. Just as there is abundant water in rainforests, but sparse water in deserts, our universe has pockets of high electromagnetism and low electromagnetism. As Dr. Moss and Hunt have demonstrated, different levels of cosmic activity can affect the human nervous system as well as our technology. With the Bronze and Iron Ages, the electromagnetic field surrounding us dwindles, causing our senses to deaden and intelligence to drop. The scientists, astronomers, and mathematicians of ancient times realized how much power they had over the population. With this knowledge, they could predict the weather, heal the body, and had deep understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Thus, had an ability to play God, which they did. These were the individuals who linked themselves with influential, perhaps royal people, and created the first priest class, where they shrouded the sciences in allegorical myth, which later became the foundation of modern religions, which could only be deciphered by themselves and the initiated. Both mythology and religion are registries of astronomical and natural phenomena written in allegorical format. The Torah, Bible, and Quran, therefore, are actually books of science. With the divide in knowledge came the divide in class. To maintain dominance and control, a monotheistic religion, Judaism, was created and enforced upon the populace. Institutionalized religion is an adhering agent. The Latin root of religion is religare, meaning to bind and to place an obligation on. Spirituality is a one-on-one personal connection with the divine, whereas religion inserts some kind of guru or prophet in between the individual and their creator, thus making the masses dependent upon this cabal. Judaism was founded around the beginning of the Bronze Age, just as our sun began the 12,000-year journey under the galactic equinoxes, the galactic fall. Around this same time, there was an attempt to preserve the knowledge of the Golden Age. This knowledge was preserved by two general types of people. There were the high priest class, who became the all-controlling elites. Then there were other spiritualists who safeguarded the knowledge for anyone who wanted to learn. In the midst of Judaism, the Gnostic Christian movement was the first attempt to break away from a tyrannous empire. This was the first anarchist movement. The Christian movement was later taken over by the priest class and morphed into another institution of control. The Bible was created at the beginning of the Iron Age, the galactic winter and lowest point of man's consciousness. With the empire fully reinstated, in came the Crusades, which murdered anyone who went against them, and the ancient mystery schools of old were destroyed by the ignorant masses. The Knights Templar learned that mysticism and dark powers influenced the world. Overcome by their desire for wealth and power, the Templars abandoned their Christian practice and pursued black magic. The Templars splintered off into several factions, two of which were the Jesuits, who remained with the Catholic Church, and another was Freemasonry, which founded the United States. In the early 1900s, the Freemasons joined together with the Church of Thelema. The Church of Thelema was founded by Aleister Crowley, a wealthy British intelligence agent and dark occultist who brought back the old empiric practices of torture, cannibalism, human and animal sacrifice, sex magic, including rape, pedophilia, bestiality, and incest. He's said to have channeled demons, or evil aliens, they're both the same, to know how to overturn the natural order and keep the chosen few at the top of the pyramid. The Church of Thelema produced two spin-offs, the Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey, and the Church of Scientology, founded by L. Ron Hubbard. All three of these factions are responsible for mind control, as well as having very strong connections to individuals in government, military, Hollywood and the arts, the media, major corporations, banking, education, medicine, and science. By controlling the powerful few, they control the many. Using the metaphysical sciences of old, this group has manipulated the masses into destroying themselves. These various cult factions both war with each other for dominance and work together in order to herd us in the direction they want. And nations are conquered culturally. These cults find those who are corrupted already, as well as have some kind of talent or use, and these people are promised the life of their dreams. You just sign your name on the dotted line, give up your life and free will, as well as the lives and free will of your children, and join the order. They decide who you marry, how many children you'll have, what job you'll have, and for how long you'll have it, what you wear, how much you earn, who much you have sex with, and for how much, when you'll die, and how you die. And you must sacrifice yourself for the good of the whole. We hear Trump talk about the shadow government. We hear Democrats talk about how Trump and the Russians are conspiring. Has anyone ever thought that they're all in on it? That the shadow government is the entire government? And our government is working with other governments to subjugate the world. There is no way in hell you would ever make it to any position of prominence without the okay from the cult. 100% of our presidents since George Washington were Freemasons. Has that ever struck you as odd? Even our founding fathers are alleged to be part of the Baconian Circle, who are a spin-off of the Knights Templar. If our vote actually counts, then how is it that everybody comes from the same club? Moreover, all but one of our presidents are alleged to be related to King John of England. In addition, the Bush family has connections to the Nazi Party, which is another dark occult order. Along with that, Barbara Bush is alleged of being the daughter to Aleister Crowley. That was the importance of sovereignty. Nobody can rule over you so long as you rule yourself. Nobody is above you. Nobody has more authority than you except for God and or nature, even if they hold a badge. You're an autonomous being, and that's the protection of natural law. This minority cabal has been overlording our existence and much of the world since America's conception and even before. What makes you think Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are any different? You're just voting for a different master. Just like in The Goblet of Fire, The Half-Blood Prince, and Deathly Hallows, any politician who tries to stand up for the people is either fired or murdered, or more likely, they're never even promoted to a position of prominence in the first place. Has it ever struck you as odd that our presidents tend to come from Ivy League schools? And those same schools have secret fraternities such as the Skull and Bones of Yale? Good people are pruned at the beginning. They will never make it past the local level. The only way you get tapped on the shoulder is if you agree to play along. By the time you're Bernie Sanders or the like, you're a contracted puppet for a death cult. A more important fact is that you can't expect one person or a tiny handful of people to save 300 million or more. It's literally impossible. You need to save yourself. So let's take a second look at secret societies and their antics through the lens of Harry Potter. Secret societies are depicted as Death Eaters. I've already mentioned several times that Death Eaters are predominantly people of wealth and prominence. Satan is Lord of the material world. He represents our R-complex. He's our lusts and quest for wealth and power, which are material, fleshy desires. Satanists don't actually worship a deity, though they may serve one. They join cults in order to garner power for themselves. The rituals they perform are a form of mind control to keep their members in line and performing their duties. Voldemort is obviously the Satan of the series. The Death Eater's quest to place Voldemort in power can be likened to the dark occultists of our time trying to create a satanic world. A world that is heavily controlled, enslaved, and materialistic. It's a world where everyone parasites off the land and each other. Let's first take a look at how one becomes a Death Eater. In The Half-Blood Prince, we see Draco Malfoy being initiated into Voldemort's order. Draco is the son of Lucius Malfoy, and Lucius works in a prominent position at the Ministry of Magic, where he frequently rubs shoulders with the minister. Lucius is also a Death Eater and lives in an estate. With this family unit, we see that being part of secret societies is generational. Select families work together, helping each other attain positions of power in order to manipulate the laws and exploit the labor and resources of others, which is how the Malfoys acquired their wealth. In our real lives, there's more than enough evidence to suggest that the wealthy elites of our time and for thousands of years are linked to secret societies and dark occultism. It's even suggested in movies and TV shows such as Hemlock Grove, Eyes Wide Shut, The Ninth Gate, Two-Sentence Horror Stories, and American Horror Story Cult. Throughout the series, we see the Death Eater's first mission is to get rid of Dumbledore. Again, Dumbledore is God and natural law. When Dumbledore is in charge, the people live in peace and humble abundance. They're allowed to express themselves freely, the economy is stable, and people are safe. Why would anybody choose any different? Logically, they wouldn't. This is why the Death Eaters must conspire and scheme to get Dumbledore and natural law removed. They must make Dumbledore look like the bad guy, and they do this by attacking the population themselves, then placing the blame on Dumbledore and Harry. Just as people blame God for allowing war and famine, the wizarding community blamed Dumbledore for not protecting the students against Voldemort and the Death Eaters. And how is he supposed to? It's not Dumbledore's fault that the students disobey him, choosing to follow the suggestions of another. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore addresses the school, saying that every day, dark forces attempt to break through these walls. In the end, their greatest weapon is you. As Dumbledore says this, the camera pans over to Draco. In this movie, and the movies following it, we see Malfoy's tortured psyche. This is symbolic for all of us. Hell on earth can only be created when we as a collective choose to operate from our lower desires, such as greed, fear, or lust, instead of our higher conscious mind. Once enough of the population is operating from a corrupted heart, they will get rid of natural law without hesitation. The Half-Blood Prince is the first movie where the Death Eaters were let into the school. This is symbolic for the corruption of the individual, which escalates to the corruption of society, where peace and freedom are killed off. Voldemort employs several methods for gaining power over the masses. His secret society uses fear and isolation in order to take over the cultural institutions and eliminate natural law. In the Order of the Phoenix, we see Lupin tell Harry that Minister Fudge isn't in his right mind. It's been twisted and warped by fear, and fear makes people do terrible things. The Death Eaters perpetrate terrorist attacks on their own community to whip people into a panic. Through fear, the population becomes more docile, willing to give up their rights and freedoms in order to feel protected and taken care of by a savior in the form of a large, all-controlling government. The news will scare people, delivering a problem, then offer a solution in the form of protection from perceived authority. When their savior, Minister Fudge, tells them that all is well and they can go back to their daily lives, this creates an almost infantile sense of security, not even bothering to try and find out the source of their threats and handle it themselves. Through the oscillation between fear and childlike bliss, we're manipulated into being both compliant and complacent. A false flag is a terrorist act committed by one group for the express purpose of discrediting another group, which is framed for it. We saw this in Kosovo. Observer missions employing American, German, and British intelligence services were sent into Kosovo to support the Kosovo Libertarian Army, or the KLA, against the evil Serbians. The KLA were armed and trained by the CIA and German Federal Intelligence Service, as well as receiving military training from Turkey and Afghanistan, honing their skills in northern Albania. With all this training, the Libertarian Army promptly smuggled drugs, ran prostitution rackets, and murdered civilians. The KLA received their guns from U.S. Ambassador William Walker's Humanitarian Foundation in El Salvador. The money they used to purchase these weapons came from Albania's heroin trafficking operations. In January 1999, it was this same gun-running Ambassador Walker who discovered the massacre at Horcrux, where the KLA leaders led the observer team to a scene of 45 dead Albanians, accusing the Serbians of murdering them. Without any investigation, Ambassador Walker announced that the Serbians had carried out the massacre. In February of that year, Serbia agreed to negotiations at the Rambouillet near Paris, where they were met with an ultimatum: become an occupied state, turning over their laws and land to NATO, or suffer airstrikes. The global powers wanted an excuse to take Serbia to the World Court for terrorism in order to have legal reason to garrison the area with UN peacekeepers and take over their natural resources, which included mines full of precious gems, oil under the Aegean Sea, and the takeover of an area that is central to the multi-billion-dollar opium trade from the Middle East to Europe. At first, the Serbians resisted the NATO takeover, and on March 24, 1999, Serbia was bombed by NATO, where in June they finally agreed to the foreign occupation. Becoming an occupied colony, obviously, Serbia's natural resources were well taken care of. George Soros, with the help of the World Bank's Post-Conflict Trust Fund, kindly established the nonprofit Kosovo Foundation for an Open Society, where they provided targeted support for the development of local governments to allow them to serve their communities. Unfortunately, since most of these local governments are in the hands of the KLA, which has extensive links to organized crime, this program is unlikely to meet its declared objective. The massacre at Horcrux was a false flag. The Albanian government attacked their own people and blamed it on the Serbians so that Kosovo could be taken over. Once again, the secret cabal of elites deployed their pawns in government, military, banking, and local crime mafias in order to paint Serbia as the big bad wolf and steal the land and resources from innocent people. To add insult to injury, Serbia's laws were dismantled in favor for the cabal to implement their own laws, which would make Serbia another puppet in the empiric beast system. But of course, Serbia isn't the only nation to suffer the brutality of secret societies. A similar thing happened during Nazi Germany when dark occultist Adolf Hitler attacked his own people economically and physically, blaming it on the communists and riling Germany into a war, which ultimately led to Germany being brought into the World Court, where their land was occupied, laws dismantled, and then reconstructed into the New World Order. And it happens here in America, too.
So in direct relation to the Queen of Heaven is the symbol of the dove. So the dove is how the moon goddess is depicted as being a crescent, a white crescent moon. The white crescent moon, as it makes its trek across the sky, looks like a dove, a white bird. So, you know, you could imagine this piece as the wings as the crescent moon, and it's making its trek across the sky at night. So this is why the dove was associated. The bird, the dove, is associated with the lunar feminine goddess, just like the falcon was associated with the male solar god Horus. And the word dove in the French language is columbe, C-O-L-U-M-B-E, columbe. This is why we have so many usages of the word Columbia or Columbus in American symbology. The founder of the country is named after the dove. His name was actually Cristobal Colon, and he was a member of a secret society network. Here you see him giving a secret society hand gesture in this painting. But he was renamed Columbus after the goddess Columbia. See, it's the feminine goddess named after the dove, Columbe. We have the district of Columbia, the name of the capital where the male dominator phallic energy, the seat of male dominator power, is rooted in the United States. And look at where it's at. It's named after the sacred feminine, the dove, Columbia, and it is situated between two states. It is situated between Maryland and Virginia. Maryland, named after the goddess of the Christian Trinity, Mary, and the Virgin, Virginia. So right in between the two feminine states named after the goddess, you have the male phallic symbol of power also taking the name of the goddess. This is placing the phallic symbol directly in a slot between the two sacred feminine states. The male dominator energy of concentrated, centralized power of this country erected right between the two feminine states of Maryland and Virginia. Here we see in the modern Christian Trinity, the goddess has been removed and replaced with the dove. You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit represented as the dove, but there is no divine mother. The feminine has been removed and it's been replaced just by the symbol that the sacred feminine goddess was given in the ancient world, the dove, Kalun. Now we're going to see a darker aspect of how the goddess symbology is used when we look at things. I'll do this one since it's lighter first. You have here the moon and the dove, because this is a sacrifice of how we use money, through credit, building up debt. So you have the moon and the dove on the same card for Visa, and it's a symbol of the sacred feminine being used in a depiction of sacrifice of an individual, sacrificing in a monetary sense. Here we see it being used in a very dark form as human sacrifice, because human sacrifice is still very real, very actively practiced in the world. It just isn't the practice of carrying people up a pyramid as how it was done in the past, or sacrificing them upon an altar with an obsidian blade or a dagger of some sort. Now, human sacrifice is carried out with the knowledge of everyone around us, and it is done willingly. People go off to sacrifice others and themselves in the act of war. War is modern day human sacrifice. And here you see the goddess with her wings depicted on a war memorial. And see, this is the goddess herself being sacrificed. A lot of researchers believe that it is them sacrificing people to the goddess. It isn't so much that they're sacrificing to the goddess. It's the reason the goddess is always depicted in conjunction with sacrifice is because they are sacrificing the goddess within an individual. It is the cremation of care, conscience, the protector, the grand architect of everything we experience is care. So this is the goddess herself depicted as being with these men as they are sacrificed along with the goddess. That's what war is. It's a ritual sacrifice of the sacred feminine. Another use of the sacred feminine symbology and imagery when it comes to human sacrifice rituals or attempted human sacrifice rituals, we see this through different events that have played out that have the sacred feminine or the name of the sacred feminine embedded or encoded within the ritual or the scenario. You have the murder of Princess Diana, which I do not believe was an accident. I believe she was taken out because of her connections with the royalty of Britain, and her name was Diana, a Roman name for the goddess Diana. We saw the Superdome incident where thousands and thousands of people were hoarded into this dome looking like a feminine breast and left there without supplies, essentially to die. And FEMA did not get to this region for days after Katrina hit. And the conditions in there were horrendous. I believe that is a deliberately designed thing that was done to try to maximize the amount of death and suffering that happened in that feminine breast, the Superdome, a symbolic representation of a breast. And the two large school shooting incidences could be seen as very clear examples of mind control, of trauma-based mind control, or at Columbine High School, again, Columbia, Colum, the dove, Columbine, and Virginia Tech, the Virgin, Virginia. Again, two names of the goddess. Again, human sacrifice rituals in disguise made to look like totally disconnected incidents. Chaos sorcery. What has been known as the Hegelian dialectic, or problem, reaction, solution. And we're going to talk about what the Hegelian dialectic is, and we're going to see an example of how this is put into action when we analyze the 9/11 occult ritual. The Hegelian dialectic is what chaos sorcery really is, and this is an ideology that was formulated by George Hegel, a German philosopher. The Hegelian dialectic is a framework for guiding our thoughts and actions into conflicts that lead to a predetermined solution. So the solution is already predetermined before anything happens. The people who are putting this into effect want a certain outcome. This is outcome-based framework, an outcome-based framework. It's saying this must occur. This is the end result that we want, and anything else is undesirable and we will not settle for. It's going to happen this way. We just have to convince people that it has to end up happening this way. So what you do is you guide thought and action into decision making that ends up how you wanted it to begin with. This is accomplished by manipulating consciousness into a circular pattern of thought and action. So again, it's a manipulation of consciousness. It's ultimately about mind control. The synthetic solution to these conflicts cannot be introduced unless those being manipulated take a side that will advance the predetermined agenda. The agenda is already predetermined. We just need to create a synthetic conflict to make this come into manifestation the way we have it originally planned and designed. So, this is Hegel's dialectic, and it is not so much that Hegel is an evil person in his own right. This is another perversion. How chaos sorcery is used as an example of the Hegelian dialectic is it's a modified version of this dialectic for a dark purpose, for manipulation. The researcher David Icke has called this problem, reaction, solution. And it's a great term for it because it describes it perfectly. You create the problem to get a reaction, and then you offer the solution. The solution was already predetermined. But I like to call it chaos, confusion, opportunity, because I think it more accurately describes what the process that's taking place is really about. You want to create chaos. You need a chaotic situation created, because the reaction that you're looking for is confusion, not knowing what to do or how to act appropriately to the situation. Once confusion enters the mix, you have fear-based consciousness. So the person is willing to accept all kinds of limitations and control to go back to order. And therefore, that's your opportunity to bring in your predetermined solution and get them to go along with what you originally wanted. This was the major crisis that they introduced. The events of 9/11, 2001 was an example of the modified Hegelian dialectic. It was an example of chaos sorcery. It was an occultic ritual of human sacrifice that involved three major examples of occultic symbology and ideology in the work to create the synthesis that they were looking for. And those three occult schools or occult ideologies that were employed on that day, the symbolism of which was employed on that day, was Kabbalah, Tarot, and Freemasonry. Now, before we get into any confusion at all, I want to state emphatically that I do not believe that any of these systems are evil in and of themselves. It is how occult sciences are used, occult knowledge is used by the practitioner to what end that determines whether they're wielded for good or evil. So it is not these practices or these systems that are of knowledge that are evil in any way. They are simply knowledge, and it is how they are used. Let's get that straight right off the bat. So these three systems of occult knowledge all encode within them the understanding of human psychological makeup and human consciousness. And the ritual of 9/11 is ultimately about the destruction of that knowledge and keeping the truth down, keeping our awareness down, destroying our awareness, destroying consciousness. So we're going to look at some examples of this occultic iconography and symbolism that was used on that day. The most glaring example of which is in tarot. This is the tarot image known as the Tower. It's a card that represents the end of an old way of things and the birth of a new way of things. It's the destruction of something that is old and worn down and the building of something new in its place. One thing is being cleared to make way for something to be put up in its place. Okay? So that's the Tower. It is depicted as being struck by a bolt of lightning, on fire, with people toppling out of the windows. And that is exactly what we saw on the day of 9/11/2001. We saw towers that were struck by forces. They were on fire and people were leaping from the windows. So clearly the occultic symbology of this particular tarot card was employed on that day. Whether this be totally by design or it be synchronicity, I'll leave that up to the audience to decide. So we have to understand first that not only the Twin Towers collapsed into their own footprint, but so did Building 7, a 47-story steel, concrete and steel reinforced building, collapsed into its own footprint in approximately 6.5 seconds at 5:20 p.m. on 9/11/2001, when no plane had struck it. So I'm not here to argue the physics of 9/11. I'm not here to even talk about any of the aspects of the how part of 9/11, the physics or the how it happened. I'm much more interested in using my time to discuss the why and the implications of the occultic symbology employed in what I consider a dark occult ritual, a ritual that embodied the modified Hegelian dialectic. And so the first thing to understand is 3 towers came down, 3 pillars, if you will, came down on 9/11, not 2. The first occult system that I'm going to look at in relation to 9/11 is Kabbalah. Kabbalah is an ancient Semitic form of occultism. Judaism takes some of its roots from Kabbalah, and this is the main symbolic structure, or this main symbolic icon of Kabbalism. It is known as the Sephirotic Tree of Life. This is known as the ladder to God, okay? The levels that go up in consciousness to God. And there are 10 of these spheres on the tree. If you count them, there are 10 total. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're known as, these spheres are known as Sephirot. So the 10 Sephirot comprise the Tree of Life. Now in the books that describe this symbol, the Sephirotic tree, they're the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah. They look at it as that there are only 10 Sephirot. There are not 9 and there are not 11. This is specifically worded into these books. To speak of there as being any more or less Sephirot is considered like a blasphemy in Kabbalah, because there are only 10. So this is where part of the name, the name of the ritual comes from. Not 9, not 11, but yet we have the ritual happens on 9/11. And we'll talk about the occult significances of the numerology as well when we explore that. But in Kabbalah, 9 and 11 are considered blasphemies against the 10 Sephirot, if you speak of there as being any less than 10 or any more than 10. And we also see that the symbolic numbers, the numbers of these buildings are symbolic when we relate the ritual to Kabbalah, because the buildings that came down were the Tower 1, which is the male tower. Okay? It has a phallic symbol on top. This is Tower 1, in the numbering system of the World Trade Center. The feminine tower is tower number 2. And then this building is World Trade Center 7. So if we add them together, we get 1 plus 2 plus 7, and that equals 10. So we see there are 10 Sephiroth. The building numbers total 10. So they're bringing down the 10 in the buildings, and they're bringing down symbolically the 10 Sephiroth. You see, in the Sephiroth, there are 3 pillars, 3 columns. You have this left-hand path known as the path of severity. You have the right-hand path that is known as the path of mercy. Again, these are corollaries to the Freemasonic pillars. This will be the pillar of mercy, which is Joachim. This is the pillar of severity, or Boaz. And then you have the path of mildness, or the path of will. Will to ascend in consciousness. This sphere representing base consciousness, and this sphere representing cosmic consciousness. Without going into very deep explanations of what each Sephiroth represents, just understand that this middle pillar is the synthesis between these two. This represents too much male aspect or control. This could be too much capitulation to control. You can look at it that way, with this path being severity, this path being mercy. You could look at it as this path is not being a controller and also not being a slave. It is not being a dominator nor capitulating to domination. Therefore, the middle way, as it is called in Buddhism, the unification of male and female, the chemical wedding. It is the ascension from base consciousness through connection with conscience, the heart chakra, and attaining cosmic consciousness or higher level awareness, represented as the crown Sephiroth. See, if you collapse these in, right? If you were to take these 3 levels and collapse them in right into the middle pillar to bring these dual aspect Sephiroth into one, you would see that this really represents the chakra system. The 7 chakras. You would have the base chakra, the sacrum chakra. These 2 comprise the solar plexus chakra, the heart chakra. These 2 comprise the throat chakra. These 2 comprise the third eye chakra, and that comprises the crown chakra. So there's the 7 chakras. All right? And we see that would be on the middle pillar, and it would contain 7 chakras. And again, the middle pillar here is building 7. All correlates perfectly. Here are the chakras, representing the 7 planets. Up the middle pillar, the spinal column, the raising of the Kundalini energy up the spine and to the top of the head. From down here, the farthest out from the sun until we get up to the solar mind. And the earth being the heart chakra of the system. The earth and moon right in the middle. It would be the 4th of the 7 chakras. And that's what's ultimately being brought down. The consciousness is being destroyed and leveled by the leveling of these towers.
As more information comes out about the American government's corruption and criminality, America, like Germany and Serbia, will be brought into the World Court. Some kind of international organization will occupy us, and natural law will be eradicated. Insert megastate. Voldemort's second tactic is isolation. In the Order of the Phoenix, Harry is comforted by Luna when she tells him that if she were Voldemort, she would want Harry to feel cut off from everyone else, because if it's just him, he's not much of a threat. Antonio Gramsci said, "You must weaken a society by dividing the population." Do we not have that now? Classes are divided, races are divided, right and left hemispheric people are divided, generations are divided, spiritual faiths divided, genders, and now we can add alternative news followers versus mainstreamers. I was born and raised in Los Angeles and still live here. There are over 128 different cultures compacted into this relatively small area. One thing I've observed, which rings true for every ethnicity that comes here, is that people who are within 3 generations of immigration still carry their tribalism. When I was in high school, we had the standard cafeteria lunches, and our lunch ladies happened to be Armenian. Everyone received a standard issue of food, but when an Armenian student approached, they always received double the quantity for the same cost. As an adult, I watched many Armenian cashiers give Armenian customers 50% discounts while charging everyone else full price. In addition, Armenian management will often give Armenian workers nicer jobs with nicer shifts and better pay. I'm singling out the Armenian community, but I literally watch this behavior with every ethnicity group. People who are relatively new to this country still recognize their fellow members as being part of their tribe and extended version of themselves, and therefore more trustworthy, which is why they take care of each other. In America, Germans, Irishmen, and Swedes become white people. Nigerians, Indigenous Americans, and Zulu become black people. You're stripped of ancestors, tribe, and culture. Instead, you suckle from the teat of those who raised you. I fantasize about tribes and villages, a life we all used to live but have since let go of in favor of mammon. How the honored and respected elders of our group would tell us our history. They would share their wisdom and pass down their traditions, both of which serve to help us with survival. Tradition, history, and living together bring people together. We see those around us as extensions of ourselves and therefore can look past differences like gender, generation gaps, and personality temperament, seeing and understanding each other more clearly. Differences that nature and the Creator have put in place so that we can balance each other and meet each other's needs. We are meant to compromise and complement each other. For without compromise, there is no balance. And without balance, there is chaos and ruin. When a group of people share a common history, share traditions, and share a faith, all of a sudden, these personality differences are seen as the gifts they truly are and are appreciated and understood. People don't doubt each other as much because there's trust. But when people no longer share a common history, geographical location, tradition, or spiritual faith, then all of these beautiful differences are no longer appreciated or understood, but rather are despised and seen as threatening. All of a sudden, a white man with a lot of Aries and Mars energy is seen as an oppressor instead of just a kind of aggressive and competitive person. Nobody likes the other. They don't understand the other, and therefore, the other is a threat which must be removed. Within a village or tribal setting, this trait can be a good thing, ensuring continuity and therefore peace within the group. But what are we separated from here in America? Especially those races who have been here for hundreds of years, like the European and African Americans. Have you ever noticed that these two races have the most homeless? So, are they lacking homes or lacking family? We have no tribe, no communities, no traditions aside from eating and shopping, no common spiritual faith, and therefore no common goal or vision. Everyone is isolated and out for themselves. We're taken out of the home and away from those who love us as early as a few months old. Our elders no longer teach us much of anything. Who teaches us instead? The state does. And women are no longer protected like they used to be. Back in the day, a woman would have her father or brother or cousin to protect her. Now what do we have? Oftentimes, dad isn't around at all, and the brother or cousin might live in another state. So what good does that do? Who protects her now? The state does. Who makes sure there's food available? Is it the matriarchs and patriarchs of the family, or is it the state? Who makes sure there's money? Who takes responsibility for orphan children? The state, the state, the state. Our communities have been replaced by empire. We have shrugged our responsibilities. And now the state is angling for the complete usurpation of family and community, that being socialism and communism and the like. At that point, we are 100% unable to take care of ourselves, and therefore must be taken care of by the true other. We are divided because we have nothing keeping us together anymore. We become further and further separated based on individual life experiences which we no longer share with the tribe. We're on our own. And this is by design. This is by the dark occultists' design combined with our consent and agreement. Many of the people in secret societies feel obligated to work in the shadows because they know we're too irresponsible to manage and take care of ourselves as divine, sovereign beings. And not only do they feel obligated, they feel it is their right to rule over us, for they think that because they practice and study the metaphysical, that they have united their left and right hemispheres, uniting fire and water, red and blue, giving us the ever-royal purple. We are all the adopted orphans of the hermaphroditic state, a state that wants us isolated and in chaos, for if we weren't, we wouldn't need them. Defeating an empire is actually quite easy and potentially bloodyless.
So it would be my true dream to see everyone in humanity just start building gardens in their yards, start thinking, well, maybe I don't really like that job. And, could the world go on without authority, without government, without just being a decentralized system where we all just started with food, water, and shelter and community and built our way out of this that way instead of seeking masters to let us go back to work?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I keep using the phrase a blank slate. I think what's in the future is what you want from it. I don't think that they're as vicious as they're made out to be. They're only interested in ruling people who are dumb enough to ask for it. This is the whole thing people keep saying about mandatory vaccine. They know that 90% of people, 80% maybe, will run with their sleeves rolled up begging for the vaccine, but they know there'll be 20% or 10% who won't bother. They don't care about us. They don't care about us. Once they have the majority, they're happy. And I think there seems to be a lot of people have these totalitarian concepts, which are based in sort of like Christian end time ideas. But outside that, I think there's a blank slate coming. And I think if you can get the future you want, if you want some kind of liberation, even a different job, even to appreciate what you have, I don't know, but I'll know that I won't be going into this great mystery with a sense of foreboding or a sense of fear. I'm going to go in with a sense of cautious optimism because I've got every intention to paint my own picture on that blank slate. And I think others should be the same way too.
That is my hope too, Thomas. I want everyone to start thinking that way, to realize they have quit their jobs. Now it's time to save the world. And we move into the direction of humanity and away from all of this. It really appears, with our megalomaniacal Bill Gates and all of everything that we're seeing, like this control grid, the 5G, able to take oxygen out of your lungs, the wall, the drones, everything, the entire police state coming down, would be this glaring wake-up call for people to say, wait, it's almost as if it's so over the top, it's engineered to make us revolt in a positive way.
Harry Potter never killed a Death Eater. He killed Voldemort. He killed a dark consciousness, first within himself and then in his external world. And that is the only way you will ever escape an empire.